What is going on, everybody? Welcome into the Shot Quality Bets podcast. I am your host, Justin Perry, here with my good friends, Alec Musa, and my co-host, Big 3 for 3. Big 3, you're both a friend and a co-host. Good to see you guys. We are here for the NBA draft episode of Shot Quality Bets. We're going to be talking about how shot quality data reveals extra information around some of the biggest players that are going to be a part of the NBA draft on Thursday. So we're really excited to break down some of the biggest names that people expected to go in the top 10, top 20 picks. We're going to sort of go more towards the college players where Shot Quality has the data, but that's what you can expect in this episode. Big 3, how are you feeling about the draft coming up? Who are some of the favorite guys you're looking at, or any sneaky feelings you have for the draft?
Yeah, man, draft's always exciting. It's always frustrating looking back at it afterwards, especially, from both a betting standpoint and just, like a prediction standpoint. It's like, yeah, I should have seen that coming. Yeah, I should have seen that coming. I think it's a lot of that. And so you can agonize over it for hours, but ultimately we're not in the front offices, like we don't really know what's going to happen, and we can have our say of what should happen. And I'm sure we've all had really good calls in that sense and really awful calls in that sense. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of fun guys. Obviously, all of us are college basketball guys. So it's getting weird with, all the G League guys, all the foreign guys. Like, there's just less college players, it feels like, at the top. So yeah, I mean, it's been a little weird, and it feels like that 8 to 10 range, or 8 to 15 range, is where a lot of the good college studs are. And so I'm really interested to see what happens there. Honestly, as a Duke fan, I'm really curious about what's going to happen with Dereck Lively, but I don't know. He's a very intriguing one to me. Another one is JHS, Hood Schifino out of Indiana. I think that when he's on, he was as good as anyone last year in college basketball. I think he's a very intriguing prospect as well. So curious to see, especially where those two land.
Yep, we're going to break down all of those players and more right here. We have a couple players ready to go, some cool graphics to show you some breakdowns from the shot quality data. But guy who does some great work breaking down shot quality data over on our TikTok at Shot Quality Bets is right here with us now, Mr. Alec Musa. How you doing today, Moose? Welcome back to the show.
I can't wait for tomorrow, dude. I am hyped. I don't know about you guys, but I am hyped, especially with the everyone talking about Jokic getting drafted during a Taco Bell commercial in the second round.
Right.
Now I think everybody and their mother is going to be paying attention to the second round. And what was it, like pick 46 that he went to the Nuggets? I feel like that's going to be the new 199 that was Tom Brady. I think everyone's going to talk about that pick now going forward.
I mean, look, I think that's one of the most fun aspects of the draft, right? Is that there are going to be players that come out of nowhere. There's going to be big names up top that actually don't pan out. We know there's a lot of pressure on those number 1, number 2, number 3 picks, and they don't often return. Players who play well at college levels, how that transition is going to go into the pros, how the game speeds up, the spacing changes, all of that is pretty difficult to handle and predict. I think, a reason that we see a player like Brandon Miller going so high is because the way Alabama plays their offense. We talk about a lot about college basketball in this podcast. We will continue to do so. But look, what you see with Miller is that he moves quick, right? Those are fast shots, quick release, a lot of motion. Like, the game kind of moves for that Alabama offense, or it did last season, how a lot of NBA offenses want to look. So he's kind of ready. And a lot of players aren't as ready as some of the names at the top, and that's what people get excited about. Of course, it's also just pure raw talent like we see at Wemby in number 1. But we're going to discuss some of the guys a little further down, what their abilities are like, what shot quality really sees in them, and maybe make some guesses as to some of the teams that could benefit from seeing them, talk about what some of the big boards are saying, and go that way. So let's dive right into it with one of the first players that we are going to talk about today. I'm going to pull up a player who we talked about a lot over the last few I guess, years at this point. I'm trying to get this file pulled up. But we have talked about the Houston Cougars for a long time on this podcast with shot quality data. So I'm going to bring up my screen, and boom, Marcus Sasser. I'm not starting in a top 5 conversation, guys. I want to make sure this is an interesting conversation. This was one of the best shot makers in college basketball for a while, and it's really exciting to see him expected to go into the next level. Big Three, I'm going to come to you. What do you make of Sasser? Do you think that he is going to transition well? What do you make of some of these, new shot quality graphs that we have on the screen?
Yeah, this graph is sweet. This is one of the first times I've seen this one too, but really like it. And, this should be at least a pretty accurate representation of, like what a lot of people should look like, right? 3-point line and at the rim. But yeah, Sasser is incredible to watch. And I think like those Houston teams really ran through him, and obviously a lot of talent around him, and even probably a teammate going to be taken in front of him in the draft here. But, really the teams ran through him. I think the biggest concern here is size. But with Houston and coming from a school like Houston too, Sasser is a very willing defender, right? And a pretty good defender. He has, his wingspan 6'7", despite him being 6'1", So I think like super athletic guy, shoots the ball super, super well, handles the ball really well. Size will definitely be a concern here. But I mean, I think he's predicted like mid-second round. Really a good pickup for mid-second round. The other thing that you're getting here is, and we saw this with a couple examples in previous year's drafts, but you're getting more experience, right? Like a lot of times the NBA draft is turned into you're taking 19-year-old kids, like that's not the case with Sasser. I don't know. I guess I don't have his age right in front of me, but he's been playing like really competitive basketball now for, 4 years, right? He was 4 years at Houston senior. So he has like 4 good years of experience, Final Four, Elite Eight, all these different things. And so it's like, you really are getting to one of these young teams in the middle of the second round. You might be getting a little more experience than you would be with a 19-year-old freshman,
I like that. Moose, I know you've discussed Sasser a good amount on the TikTok. What do you make of him? We see some of these stats here: 85th percentile in 3-point shooting efficiency, 83rd percentile in terms of rim attacking efficiency. Some of the weaknesses are like, he doesn't go to the rim very much, only 20% frequency. What do you make of this prospect? Like Big Three said, slated to be mid, maybe early second round. I've seen a big board or two with him around 30, but I think that's probably high. Moose, are you with us? Are you muted?
Yeah. I couldn't seem to unmute myself there, but yeah. No, what I like about him from an NBA standpoint is what was it right there? He was 95th or 85th in 3-point efficiency, but he was also 82nd in the 82nd percentile in efficiency scoring off passes and the 77th percentile in creating his own shot. So he doesn't get kind of pushed into one type of style. He's more versatile than you would think from a guy going in the second round. And in today's NBA, and you don't want to be shoehorned into one spot, but you also want to be able to play today's style of basketball, which has become, can you play defense and shoot the three? Well, guess what, Marcus Sasser? He's a 3-and-D guy. Yeah, he's not a wing. He's not 6'7", 6'8", 6'9". He's 6'1". But guys like Javon Carter have played for years on end after playing multiple years in college for a defensive-oriented team and a defensive-oriented coach, and gone on to have a productive NBA career.
Yep, I agree. I don't know if he's ever going to be the anchor, starter for a championship caliber team, but he is going to be a very consistent player who, if he knows his role, can make some very good contributions defensively, and finishes at the rim. Is the type of player you kind of want on a second unit type of player, especially early in his career. Of course, we don't know where he's going to go, how it's going to blossom, but I do think you're going to get some decent value here out of Sasser. And you see he is smart with his shot chart, isn't really in the blue too much. Of course, the size of these hexagons correspond to how often the shot is taken. So he is at the rim a decent amount comparatively, and he gets a pretty good, look from behind the arc, which is what you want. This is the type of player that the NBA is looking for. Very exciting to see how he fares. I do think he could sneak into the top of that second round. Going to be a kind of fun one to check out. Let's waste no time. Big three, I want to let you talk a little bit about your guy, Mr. Dereck Lively. I know you said you have some interest in him. We don't have the photo, and we can see sort of how he plays. Not really too many surprises, right?
Yeah, it's so funny. As he was kind of starting to get some hype in this draft, I pulled up the shot quality, and it's funny. He's like 70 or 97th percentile in frequency attacking the rim, efficiency in transition, cutting, like all those things. But he shoots at the rim or gets lobs for dunks, right? So I can think like he almost breaks shot quality in that sense, where it's like if he's not taking a wide open layup or dunk, he's really not shooting that much. I think last year his points per possession was like 1.4, which was like 98th percentile.
That's awesome. I mean, that's kind of what you want. Like if you're a big man, you don't want, and you're not the elite mid-range floater guy, or you don't have that type of touch, get those lay-ins, body down low. I mean, I think this is what you want to see.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing with Lively too that you're getting is he's obviously super young, and I think I am a Duke fan, so I probably have watched him more than any of these other guys. In terms of like, I watched Houston, Alabama a few times, but I watched every Duke game, and I think the biggest thing with Lively was the growth throughout the year. He looked like non-serviceable in the first handful of games. Like it was hard to even see him out on the court. And I think like the biggest thing was the growth this year for him was massive. And he became maybe the best interior defender in college basketball this year by the end of it, or at least top three. He had averaged almost 2.5 blocks a game, and he wasn't even playing that much early on in the season. He had some huge block. I think he had like 8 blocks against UNC one of the games, right? And he was super, super good about, like recovering back after he was going over to shot block. Like he just did a lot of things really, really well at the end of the year and was still a presence down low. Like their last tournament game, I think he scored maybe 2 points, but still had 11 rebounds. He was really, really good towards the end of the season. And so I think it was cool to see like that growth with him. And you kind of remember like, hey, this is an 18, 19-year-old kid. It's like the NBA team that's taking him, if you're making a, 10, 15-year bet on this guy, like I'm sure he's going to get much, much better. And I think in the NBA especially, like, yes, three-point shooting is valuable, and he is just never going to be, or it doesn't seem that he's going to be a three-point shooter. But rim protection is really, really big, and rebounding is really, really big. And there's going to be a spot for you on a lot of teams if you are an elite rim protector, rebound, and, can make wide open dunks when you need to. So, it makes sense. The movement up makes sense. And honestly, one of my favorite bets for the draft is for him to go in the top 10. You can still get like plus 200 on it, plus 220 on it. I think that someone in the 8, 9, 10 range is going to take a gamble on him and take him in the top 10. So yeah, that's my take there. Maybe a little Duke bias, but I really do think he's one of the better prospects in the draft.
Yep, projected mid-first round. I think that is a fun bet to make. Big three, always making sure we have something to play. Appreciate that one. He is that rim protector, and I think there are some interesting matches for him. I've seen people say, getting him to like Atlanta would be interesting. They're in that range. I think that you could probably see him, going to a team like maybe the Thunder if they kind of reach for him a bit. Some of the better fits might be like the Jazz. That would be a really crazy combination to develop with Walker Kessler and Lively for the next few years, both just being elite rim defenders. I think it'll be fun. I do. I think there will be some interesting moves here. I don't know, Musa, do you have any thoughts about if Lively feels like the type of player a team would reach for?
Not so much thoughts on Dereck Lively himself, but what I was thinking when looking at his kind of position on NBA big boards, NBA draft big boards, and looking where he's going in mock drafts, is if you look at the ESPN top 100 recruits for the class of 2022, there's a good chance that the top 5, unless Lively goes within the lottery picks or Whitehead or Nick Smith, there's not a good chance. It will be the first time in I don't know how long that a player in the top 5 didn't get drafted as a lottery pick going into the next year. Because you think You had Chet Holmgren from a couple years ago, RJ Barrett and Zion, Michael Porter, Josh Jackson, Jason Tatum. The list goes on. And then this year you have Lively, Whitehead, Nick Smith, Dylan Mitchell, and Bailey from UCLA. And right now, Lively, Whitehead, and Smith are kind of on the cusp there, I believe, in the first round and or potentially lottery. But I just found that interesting. That
let's talk to me about Nick Smith, because I know you're a Nick Smith fan.
Well, my thing with Nick Smith was, if you look, I'm gonna pull up if you want to pull up his shot quality game by game, his game log and where he placed on the shot quality points per possession rankings, what percentile he was in. He's a guy that you just look right there. That is bright red for his shot quality points per possession ranking at the end of the year. And he did, 1% in creating his own shot. But this is also a guy at the beginning of the year, if you look at it, wasn't too shabby, honestly. And then he missed a large chunk of the year with a knee injury. I believe it was the Bradley game where he got hurt somewhere early in the season. And they were talking about him coming back within a month, and then 2 months goes by, and people are talking about him sitting out the entirety of the season, not coming back. And he does come back to try and help Arkansas make another Elite Eight run. And he was just downright dreadful, especially in the NCAA tournament. Shoots under 40% from the field during the year. And it's hard enough to be a freshman to come in and be asked a lot, which he was at the very beginning, and he did somewhat improve in the first couple of games, to then come back from injury. You're not getting those reps. You're not on the court. You're watching your teammates play while you're sitting on the sidelines rehabbing, and then coming back and just playing so poorly and never getting in that groove against tougher competition in the hardest part of the college basketball schedule when everyone's trying to make a bid to the NCAA tournament. So he's one of those guys who at the beginning of the year, all the mock drafts had him in the top 5. Now he's in the mid first rounds, borderline top 20.
Like after Lively. Right. Yeah. Right,
yeah. It's one of the, do you believe that he was, like, I watched him play, especially in the NCAA tournament. He was not good. Like he was not, his explosiveness seemed to be hindered by maybe his knee injury or the lack of opportunity to take control of the game. They did have a lot of talent there. So I think he's a project, but I also think he has very high upside, and that shouldn't be forgotten just because he's.
Yeah. Big three. What do you make of Nick Smith? I mean, he definitely has the knee problem. Could be a reason he's a little bit lower, but a lot of potential, talented combo guard, can kind of do it all. Could fit with, like, some of these teams looking to make a couple moves. I could see him in like Rockets culture and how the Warriors play, maybe even how the Nets play, given his skill set.
Yeah, he's an interesting one for sure. I think you talk about Lively, which to me is like your safe option, right? I think that's why he probably is going to carve himself into a spot, at least in the top 12, is you're going to get the rim protection. You're going to get the defense. You get a 7'7" wingspan. Then you go to Smith, where, he's not super big. He has not shown an ability to be efficient from the floor, at least at, the college level. So why would he at the NBA level? And then you have, injury risk. He's sometimes is a good defender, but not always wasn't a super willing defender, And so I think like this is a huge risk. But what I will say is, if you're a team drafting in the 20s, that's exactly what you want, right? Like, I think a perfect team would be a Nets. I think the Nets, like, when I think about a spot for him, I think Nets, because you have the ability to get him shots, get him volume, and if he works out and he's great, like, perfect. If he doesn't work out and he's, like, the Nets draft back to back at some point, I think he's like
21 and 22.
Exactly. I think he's a good, like, high risk, high reward guy. But the other thing too is you're getting a capable scorer. Now, maybe you might not be getting an efficient and capable scorer, but I also think the Nets are one of those teams that are kind of in a position like that, where it's like, hey, if we can get a guy who, as a rookie or, maybe next year, like, can come in and really contribute scoring wise, like, that's a huge get. So I don't know. I've seen him mocked to the Lakers, which makes no sense to me, because I think someone like him, you're going to need volume, which you shouldn't be able to get on the Lakers, and I just, that doesn't really make as much sense. I think a team that's more of like building up right now that can take a high risk, with a guy that could be a great scorer, makes more sense to me. But also that's just my opinion. But
yeah, no, I fully agree with you. I think that it is going to be like a real reason to take a player like him. Ready to contribute, has kind of the skill set you want. I don't know. It's going to be. I'm actually getting really excited for Thursday. I don't know about you guys. There are some really great players that are coming in this draft class. Another one that I think people have been talking about a little bit is Colby Jones from Xavier. So I'll bring up his shot chart here. Another guy who's, he'll take some of these outside shots for sure. Does take the mid range, probably shouldn't take the deep mid range, but who should? Like, really, who should? You shouldn't. But I don't know. Musa, I'll come to you first on Colby Jones. Do you have any thoughts on the Xavier man?
You know what? The shot chart, or the heat chart, I should say, isn't too surprising given that, he was good for Xavier. And I want to say I've seen articles already talking about some of the more undervalued sharpshooters, and I've seen his name thrown around quite a bit. Mostly those headlines are headlined by Jordan Hawkins from UConn. And, I don't know if Colby Jones to me is probably in the lower end of one of those. As you saw with the heat chart, it's more blue than anything. He can still hit the three. He takes a lot of 3-pointers, but most importantly, he's another one of those guys I want to see if he can play defense. And he shows up in the green when it comes to the steals metric. And if you're going to go out there and you're able to the Big East is good basketball. If you're able to go out there and shut out opposing guards and smaller wings and improve from the 3-point distance and just get better as the year goes on and your career goes on, I don't think that's a bad pick at all, especially in the second round where I think he's going to go. Is he not?
Yeah. I do think he is slated to go in the second round right now. Let me check a few of these boards. There's a lot out there. There's some good sites that kind of like conglomerate everything. Yeah, he's not really going to be a first round guy, but I do think this is one of the players that ShotQuality's data definitely lends to being a little bit more worth it. We're not really saying that anyone's like not worth it, but he definitely has some of the sleeper value. Of course, what the heat chart here doesn't really illustrate, which I think, maybe we need to continue to work on this a little bit. It's like for his mid-range shooting, while his mid-range shooting isn't a valuable shot compared to his 3-point shooting, it is a valuable shot compared to the rest of college basketball. So his short mid-range rated in the 98th percentile, his long mid-range in the 93rd. So he did develop good mid-range looks for what a mid-range look is. All right. That's the little bit of the caveat. So he does, a lot of things well. I mean, you're talking about a player that gets to the rim well and can shoot the three pretty well for a player of his size and stature. So I'm excited about Colby Jones. I think it should be an interesting fit and maybe a player that come this time next year, we're like, hey guys, remember last time we were here talking about Colby Jones and what he was able to do? I'm not really too sure about like betting and putting money on a player like this to go above or below position. It's a little bit tough and probably not worth the edge on hold, especially in a market where books justifiably have reasons to have higher hold than probably anywhere else. I don't know your take on that, Big Three, but it's definitely a tough market. I would more call this a player to watch than a player to bet.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's some things about Colby Jones that interest me. I think the biggest thing is he is more than just a scorer, right? Like I think he kind of played the role of like, I'm a better athlete and basketball player than you. At a lot of times at Xavier, like against Pitt in that, I think it was round of 32 game. He had like only 10 points, which for him was low, but he had 14 rebounds and 7 assists. It's like thinking about a guy. I mean, he's 6'5" and a super athletic team like Pitt. He's got much bigger guys on his team. 14 rebounds in that game was massive, and I think there's just like he found other ways to impact the game. And like you said, Musa, he had, he had 40 something steals this year, like he definitely did things that impacted the game a little bit, which to me is got to be worth something, and so I think like with him, you're getting a pretty good basketball player, I mean, he shot 38% from 3 this year. He didn't take a ton of attempts, but, and 56% from 2. So he really was getting like pretty good shots, and he was pretty efficient when he did score. But yeah, I don't know. I think he just did a lot of things well. And so I think like as a backup guard, for one of these teams that they're getting him late first round, early second round, I think is where he's slated to go. Like he's a pretty serviceable backup guard. Maybe not next year, but once again, he's got 3 years of good high level D1 experience. So maybe next year even, and so I don't know. I think he's definitely worth an early second round pick. And like you can see, ShotQuality does like a lot of things that he does. So yeah.
Into it. I like it. I'm excited for some of these players for sure. Anyone else you guys really want to discuss? I know another interesting player from the shot quality point of view is someone like Colby Brown. So let's pull up his profile here on the shot chart. The Missouri player, another guy who's, pretty good by the basket. Interesting to see one side here so much darker than the other. Let's pull up some of his actual shot quality numbers here and see if we can look into some of that left-right discrepancy. Musa, any thoughts here on Colby Brown coming out of Missouri? Pretty good on the shot quality numbers. And, yeah, nothing driving right. Got to make him go to the right if you're the coach. But if you're defending him, probably want him going left. But anyway, Musa, what do you make of this player?
Well, they did the same thing with Jaylen Brown in the Eastern Conference Finals, just saying. They said make him go left. And then you could see on Twitter a bunch of, a montage of Jaylen Brown trying to go to with his left hand, just getting the ball stolen. But I will say Missouri, they were a surprise team after the year they had 2 years ago. I think they were like 10 games under 500, nowhere near making the NCAA tournament. Then last year they were somewhat of a surprise team in the SEC. Picked up big win after big win, made the dance, beat Utah State. And I think the unquestionable leader and the guy who was there the whole time during the good and the bad, during the last 4 years of Missouri basketball was forward Colby Brown. And he was good. He was, I think, all SEC or something 2 years ago, back when they were bad, because he scored like 16, 17 points per game. And then this year he took off from a more efficiency, like he's more efficient. And I don't think he took home any accolades, but I think for him, he'd be more than happy to shelf an all SEC award to make the NCAA tournament during his last run. And just pulling up these numbers, he's a good basketball player that does a whole lot of everything. And yeah, he might just be able to go to his right, but he seems like a guy who should be able to develop. I don't know the man personally. I don't know what's going on in between the years there, what kind of mentality he has and work ethic, but you just look at the counting statistics and he continued to improve every single year. And from an efficiency standpoint, I pull up his per game. He shot 55% from the field last year. He shot 48% from the field 2 years before that. 3 years before that, 47%, and his freshman year, 40%. So he's obviously working on something to continue to get better, and his three-point game developed as well. So Colby Brown might not be the sexiest pick that ever comes out, but he's also a guy who seems like he's grinded for 4 years at Missouri, a school that's not necessarily known for being a basketball powerhouse, yet he led them to the round of 32. Should be Princeton, but I digress. I like him personally. I see nothing wrong with taking a guy like Colby Brown. Again, we don't work in the NBA and we don't know these guys. We're not having interviews with them. Yeah. But if 77% that high block rate, he's got solid spacing, he attacks the rim, creates his own shot. Why not take a shot on this guy? You know?
Athletic guy. Missouri creates a strong style of player. I'm going to talk about a couple, unless Big Three have any closing words here.
I was going to add to that really quick. I completely agree with Musa. I think there's obviously intangibles that teams are actually getting to look into with these guys, but as someone who only really has access to the numbers and I guess game film, the one thing I really see with him is he did develop other parts of his game. He did not shoot threes at least well in his first 3 years. He averaged over 2 3-pointers attempted per game, but he shot 23% in his first 3 years. Last year, he shot 46% from three on 3.3 attempts per game, right? And the whole time, I mean, he was a 75% career free throw shooter. Like he had it in him, I guess, but like really developed that shot. The other comment with Kobe is one of my issues here is his size. He looks like he's overweight almost to a certain extent. And I think I've seen some stuff with him around the draft of like, hey, he's probably gonna have to lose, 20 pounds. But the comment that I'll make back at that is it's different in college where you don't have access to this plethora of like absolute studs, right? Because Kobe was their big guy, and he was responsible for guarding, the Sheboys and like these other like really big dudes. And I think like that's something that, he was probably encouraged to put on weight. And it was probably an advantage that, he's only 6'8", but he weighs 255 or whatever it was, And so I think like that holding that against a kid when it's like, that's probably what his team wanted him to do to win, and that was the build that he had to have in order to defend his position. Like, I don't know. I don't really like holding that against someone, especially when they've shown ability to really progress in other areas. So that wouldn't really scare me as a front office or, as a fan of a team that drafted him. I think he seems like the type of guy just based on growth in other areas that is definitely willing to do, what it is to help his team compete.
I like that. So, that's a good point. Yeah. I mean, look, if he's out here being a professional athlete already in the NBA draft, I'm pretty sure that his training abilities and commitment to what he's doing really wouldn't stop at his ability to change his body. We've seen a lot of young players need to do that. It's part of the game, whether you're Chet Holmgren and you need to put on a lot of weight, or you're other players who need to sometimes size down to get to a better play weight for the NBA style. It's different, and it's a really good point that you brought up, Big Three. So let's finish up the episode with a few of the major names in the draft. People are talking about these players. You want to talk about these players with your friends. Everyone is discussing what's going on. And Big Three, you mentioned him really at the top here of the episode when we were sort of just shooting it about the draft. Hood Schifino, got him up on the screen here. Pretty interesting. I mean, I'm not super surprised. And we'll again go into his actual shot quality. This is compared to every shot's value in the NCAA. So you're seeing blue because in general, shooting a 45% two-pointer is going to be one of the worst probability. I don't even know today, guys. But in terms of like just raw points, expected points per possession, mid-range is the worst. So it's always going to be blue in these graphs, right? What's more interesting to see is where he's taking these shots. Some good selection, not really playing too much on the side of the hoop, getting good looks, not super afraid to take the outside shot. Big Three, I'll come back to you and I'll pull up his numbers here as I do it. What do you make on Hood Schifino? Where do you think he's going? What type of team is going to benefit from him?
Yeah, I think he's honestly like someone, what we talked about with Smith is pretty applicable to some of the JHS stuff. I think JHS will go before Smith ultimately, but really, really good playmaker. And also like, I mean, I hate to keep saying wingspan, but he has a 6'10" wingspan, right? So for a smaller guy, like pretty long, athletic. But what I will say is, I mean, it's hard to watch the Indiana at Purdue game where Indiana beats Purdue and Hood Schifino scored, 35, really efficient from the field and just absolutely took over, and think that this guy is not going to be able to be an impact player in the NBA, right? I think like when he's on, it's really, really good. You watch some of those games and you're like, man, he is good enough to start at the next level, and then you have your 8-point games in the first round of the NCAA tournament against Kent State, like it was all over the place. He had multiple 30-point games this year and multiple games where he scored 5 or less. And it's really tough to see that. But I think ultimately the ability, the playmaking ability, the shot creation ability, and the shot making ability is like really what interests me, and I think that ultimately you're getting someone who's going to have high upside. I think like the downside with him is he's just not able to be efficient ever at this level, and I think that I don't know. I don't think that's something.
Is it efficiency though? Like it's almost like he has the feeling of a crunch time player who the defense isn't really letting you get anything off from behind the line, guarding the rim well. You have to settle for mid-range jump shots in some of the most important scenarios in the NBA. Like we saw the Heat win games off of big mid-range jump shots, stay competitive because what they're able to do when the defense locks down the three-point line. You know, this is somebody that you can turn to manufacture a good shot, 14 feet away from the bucket, at least comparatively to everybody else. It's not necessarily the best shot in the NBA or in the NCAA, but it will be a reliable mid-range artist. And it's not really the most common type of player anymore. So when he can take over and you can rely on it and he's hitting, it's like they're still good shots, but I think his game will have to change at least a little bit for the next level.
I agree with that a lot, actually, Justin. It's like, right, his ability to create shots at the end of a short 24-second shot clock, you're going to take over a lot of other guys' ability to create shots, And so I actually do really agree with that because he is such a good shot creator and maker. But it's just like, ultimately, is he the guy that you want standing in the corner for a wide open kick out three? Probably not. Maybe he's the guy you want like running your second unit and being the guy at the end of possessions on your second unit. So I agree that in current form, he's kind of going to need a unique role to like really contribute. But I do think he can get to one of the, to a spot where he's able to like really contribute and start for an NBA team. So makes sense. I think mid first round is the perfect spot. Once again, I don't think like the Lakers is a good fit for him. I think you need more of like a team that's really building and coming up still.
The Wizards.
That's better off taking a risk. Exactly. So
he fits well with the Wizards. I think, I wouldn't be shocked to see him like, I think Pacers, they're in that end of the top 10, could go there. But anyway, Musa, what do you make of JHS?
I think we fit well with the Wizards, dude. I think everyone fits well with them. I don't know if they'll have any players by the end of this week with Porzingis and looking to be traded to Boston, but whatever. I read an article, I think yesterday, on the Score about your ability to improve as a three-point shooter correlated with your free throw making ability coming into the NBA. And JHS shot almost 80% from the line last year, and 33% isn't terrible for a true freshman from beyond the arc. But I think just looking at those two numbers, those two percentages, you could see a future where he becomes a much more improved three-point shooter that matches more of his free throw shooting ability. So that is something I saw right away because I read that article and they were showing guys. I don't remember all the names at this point, really any names. I feel like I blacked out now. I can't remember anything. But a lot of them were, hey, they were really good free throw shooters in college. Their three-point shooting was subpar, and it continued to increase as they continued their professional career. And there's a lot of blue there around the three-point line. I could see the same thing here from a young kid that is a one and done coming into the league. A couple of years from now, he's a 38% three-point shooter. Would not be shocked one bit.
I like it. And look, I think a lot of people agree that what we saw in his season at Indiana from behind the line isn't exactly the way his mechanics really would lend you to think he's going to shoot, right? And that's a big deal. That's what all these draft analysts try to see past. Small sample sizes, one and dones. It's a tough business to predict the draft. But I do think Schifino should be inside the top 10. I feel pretty comfortable with that one. If you want to make a gamble, I'm not sure the odds totally. But I don't think that's a bad look. I do think the potential is pretty high there. I don't know if there's any real reason to be betting that. Especially if anything's like, minus 200 bets on the draft, or just, I think you want to play for the crazy stuff.
Justin, sorry, I have one more comment here.
Please,
the other thing I'll say is with this graph, and honestly, this took me a second to think about too, is it's shot quality possession percentile, right? And so I think the other thing with JHS, they, Indiana was good, especially down low, right, with your Race Thompson, whatever. But they weren't as good like guard wise, right? And so a lot of times it ended up being JHS like having to create for himself. And so I think the fact that he was shooting 46% from two, and you see all this blue, it almost is, to me, says more like, okay, wow, he like shot better than he even should have given the shots that he took, you know? And I think like, I think of him at least as like a shot maker, like he's taking tough shots. And so like the shot quality thing, like this graph being blue, like maybe indicates, yes, he took a lot of really tough shots, but I don't think it necessarily means that he's not making them or he wasn't good at those shots, right? You can correct me if I'm wrong, Justin, but I think that's kind of
Yeah,
how
you're
you have
right.
to interpret this one with a shot maker like him.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not like you look at those long mid-range shots were blue, but in actuality, their percentile against all long mid-range shots are good. It's the same thing with a lot of players who shoot in the mid-range. It's just always going to be that way. In terms of the shot quality, points per possession percentile for all shots, bad. In terms of just how good everybody is at the long mid-range, good. So I think there might be a need to continue to improve that graph a little bit, or maybe have like a secondary like relationship graph with it that shows some of this stuff. But it is still really interesting to look at how some of these players play. I don't know if there's anyone else that you guys really want to talk about. There's some really cool players out there. We will be sharing a few more players on Twitter. I have all these really cool graphs for guys like I'll tease everyone's favorite Jordan Hawkins here. Obviously looks really nice. Everyone loves to see that. But no, I think this has been a great episode. I want to thank Big Three and Alec Musa for joining me today. We will be back every week from here on out. Like Shot Quality Bets podcast is back. We took a little break. We slept in May, but we are here. We will be talking about the offseason every week. We have 2 conferences that will be on tap every single week. So starting next week with the Big Ten and the Ivy League, we'll be getting right into some of the biggest moves, coaches, transfers, like everything you need to know. So very exciting stuff, and excited to be back here with these guys for the episode next time. So make sure to like, subscribe, do all that stuff, and we'll see you next time here on the Shot Quality Bets podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a good one, guys.